personally think that if we have to throw, Morris is going to be able to show up and make those passes. I'm just praying that down in Arizona it doesn't rain as much. I mean, I'm pretty sure it doesn't rain as much as it does up here in Seattle. So not
360 days of sunny weather in Arizona.
I think it's the complete opposite of that here in Seattle. But heading into our last segment, which is really about the weather too, and all those intangibles you can't get around. I mean, there's things like travel time, and this is the furthest you guys travel all season. You guys haven't been up to Montlake since 2015, and I think it's been 2007 since you guys have won against UW. Do you think your team's mentally prepared to play the Huskies, whether or not we're a better or worse team?
Yeah, I actually think they sound pretty ready, at least from what they said at the press conferences. I mean, it's so crazy because I think it's supposed to rain every day for the next 2 weeks in Seattle, but the forecast on Saturday does not predict any sort of rain. So I don't know if the football gods are watching over us this weekend, but whatever it is. But yeah, it sounds like they're ready. That was a lot of the questions that were popping up in these media sessions. It was a lot of this is going to be you're going to be facing rainy weather. How are you going to prepare for this? And Kevin Sumlin said that they've been doing wet ball drills throughout the week. Just kind of getting a feel for what it's going to be like if they have the ball and it's going to be a rainy night. And Lucas Haversick has said that he's kicked the ball around a few times doing the wet ball drills because the ball is a little bit heavier when it's wet. So they're not ignoring anything. Like this is not something that it's just like, oh, it might rain. Oh well, what are we going to do about it? Like they're planning for it. Like they're ready for this game to be a rainy game. But I mean, that's only half the battle, right? Like you can simulate rain games, however you want. You can wet the ball, you can dunk it in a bucket of water as much as you want, but it's just not the same as being in that atmosphere and the rain is actually coming down on you and it's making the entire grass wet and everything. Like it's a totally different feel. So it sounds like they're ready for it, but it's never the same in practice as it is in a game. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, having played sports in Seattle my entire life. Like, rain during a game is something else. Like, you just can't practice for it, like you said. One thing I'm super worried about, at least on my end, is that your guys' receiving core in terms of injuries looks like it's a lot healthier than what UW's is looking like. And I couldn't find any other positions. I mean, other than the inside linebacker core, which I think might be worse off than our receivers right now, just because of all of those departures. But I mean, I couldn't really see a position group at all from our team to yours where we had a crazy big lead in terms of talent or personnel or depth. And the only thing that I can really pray for is a lack of injuries, which I think is super hard to get around when you're planning for games. How much, I know you guys have had a couple injuries. Like, how much has that hindered your guys' team last week? Do you think it's going to do much for you guys this week?
Well, I mean, on defense, it certainly hurt. We had a couple injuries last week in the middle of the game that kind of just screwed up the whole defensive scheme. But otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of guys. Like, they're pretty much, 5-6 deep at every single position. Like, Arizona had 4 or 5 different receivers that they could have rotated through last week, and that was without 2 of their receivers. So now they're both going to be back. Brian Castillo's coming back. Like, Brian Castillo started last year for Arizona, so he's going to be thrown right into the mix. And they've got a lot of options at wide receiver. I think that running back depth as well was a little bit depleted now with a couple of injuries to Frank Brown and Bam Smith at the beginning of the season. But that's still a really strong and deep running back core as well. And we only saw 2 running backs from that group last week, just because Gary Brightwell was running the ball so much and he was doing such a good job at it. So, if Gary Brightwell has an off day, they can give it to Michael Wiley. They can give it to Nathan Tilford, who's been here for 3 years. Jalen John's coming in as a freshman, but he's huge. Like, he's just built to be a good running back. So they got a lot of options. And, that entire offensive line is, returning. And, they've got a lot of big dudes on that line too, which I know has a lot of big offensive linemen too. I mean, I was talking with a beat reporter earlier in the week who covers Washington, and he was saying that half the reason why that run game was so good last week was because of Washington's offensive line. They were running it to one side of the ball. So I mean, can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm not too familiar with their offensive line, but everything that I've heard is that you guys got a couple of big boys there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan of linemen, and especially the O-line. I mean, I was a running back in high school for most of it. And so, being in the trenches and, giving respect to those offensive linemen, I think is, absolutely number one on my list when talking about football. And I'm 99.99% sure that this offensive line starting group we have is the heaviest we've had on average since UW started playing football however many years ago. I think we've capped out at about an average of 230 pounds across the – or 320 pounds, sorry, across the O-line on average,
yeah.
which is absolutely insane. I mean, like 230, sure. Like I'm sitting here 205. Like, yeah, 230 is a lot. I was there 4 months ago. But 320, like that's insane. I mean, there's problems that have been plaguing our own line from our center being center leaving from last year to this year and throwing a younger guy who hasn't had much practice there. I mean, our long snapper was absolutely abysmal last week. But a lot of it comes down to our left tackle. I forget his name right now, so shame on me. I got to look that up and tweet about it later. But it really comes down to our left tackle. He was a huge presence on the line last year, given his grade level. Like, it's insane. I remember all these things about him, but not his last name. He was just working and practicing. He was getting groomed for all these positions, and like he was absolutely like being set up to be the next leader. And now I want to say his name's Jackson Kirkland. I hope that's right.
That sounds right, actually. Yeah.
But like he's sitting there at left tackle and just dominating at the position when we played last week against Oregon State. And so that was absolutely good news for us. Like seeing that, especially on a rainy weather game like that, and having a quarterback who's starting and playing in their first college game ever, being able to have that O-line step up, take leadership, and just dominate there. Or I'm not gonna stretch it to dominate, but like exceed expectations with how many departures we had is phenomenal. It's something optimistic. It's something good to look forward to heading against you guys next week. And that's one of the biggest matchups I think I'm going to be watching. Is like I'm going to ignore the balls. I want to see how our O-line does against what I think is a pretty stacked defensive line. And I think that's going to be one of the key matchups heading into tomorrow night.
Oh, this game's going to be one in the trenches, 100%. You know, and going back to what you said, 270 rushing yards. I think you guys dominated. I think it's safe to say you dominated that game. But yeah, this game's totally going to be one in the trenches. Whether it's going to be Arizona's offensive line stepping up or whether it's going to be, UW's offensive line stepping up. But, however this game is going to be won, we're going to look back at the stat sheet and we're going to see it was won in the trenches. How many tackles for loss did the other defensive line have? How many rushing yards did they have? It's going to be won in the trenches. There's a lot of options and a lot of weapons that Arizona has, but it's going to come down to the trenches. So that's definitely going to be the matchup to watch. And it'll be interesting to see because, Arizona actually has a lot of big body dudes. Like that was not something that we were able to say as of a couple of years ago. They were dudes 240, 250 pounds on the defensive line. They were just getting tossed around. Like it was terrible to watch. But, now there's some real big dudes, 290, 300-pound plus dudes that are going out there and actually playing the defensive line position. So that it's going to be a war in the trenches. That's certainly something that I'm going to be watching for.
Yeah, two other things to just kind of keep under the radar, especially for people watching this episode right now, is that there's two things that don't really play into many games that are going to be playing into tomorrow night's battle, and that's crowd noise. I mean, obviously everyone in Pac-12 knows like Montlake is pretty well known. UW's pretty well known for their fan base and how loud we can get during games. No fans tomorrow night. So that's going to be a big plus for you. But something I think that's going to offset that, and you can tell me how you feel about it, is travel time. You guys don't travel up this far north very often or this far away from your school very often. And I know we're at a level of play where travel time and like being rested and having that distance of lag isn't a big factor. But again, tell me how you feel about the travel time, the distance, the crowd noise, and how all that you think is going to play into Arizona's game plan.
Well, yeah, traveling is something I don't think anybody really thinks about, but it's a big deal. They left today, and they have to, especially in this year with, all of the COVID tests and all of the protocols and regulations they got to go to. So I would even argue it's even harder right now to travel that far, because they have to do all these regulations and all these COVID tests. But, it sounds like they're good to go. But yeah, totally. This is their first road game. They were supposed to travel to Salt Lake City in week 1, but obviously that didn't happen. So these dudes have been in Tucson for several months now. So this is their first time really getting out of the Arizona, just getting out of the Tucson area, let alone Arizona. So it's definitely something that nobody really talks about. But I think, traveling that far up north and, the weather is going to be crappy. It's definitely something that nobody wants to talk about, but it'll definitely come into play because they're going to be flying in. It's going to be rainy. So as soon as you get there, you're already in the Seattle atmosphere of this weather is so weird. Like, as soon as you land, you're in the atmosphere. So it's There's not a whole lot of time to really get going. So it's not something that people talk about, but it'll certainly be a factor this weekend.
Yeah, one thing people really don't realize, especially when they haven't visited or been to Washington very much, especially the Seattle area, is how cold it can get during the day. I mean, 3 days ago, I was in my car driving somewhere and was absolutely thrown aback when I looked at my freaking thermometer in my dashboard and it said 42 degrees at 2 in the afternoon. I was, it's November, like barely that at this point. Like, why is it this cold? And so one thing I'm going to be hoping for, because I want to see a good game, is that none of your guys get injured from that drastic delta change from super hot weather to super cold weather. I'm going to be praying for all of you guys to be stretching, to be healthy, to have that great battle without injuries, because again, that's one of the things you can't really control in football, and that is always so painful for both teams to see, is when injuries happen on the field.